Okay, so now we're getting into just a little bit of the psychology of the deadlift. So basically, we talked about earlier, like Steve used to say to me, commit to the pool, and that's sort of an antithesis to the modern day, attitude. You see, if you go on the internet, you're gonna, read 500 articles about, how not to get hurt or something, which is good. I mean, but like, you obviously can't be stupid, but there has to be an element of balls to your training if you want to, get good. And that's what we're talking about. It's just committing to the pool, and it's basically walking up to the lift and knowing it's complete ahead of time. It's your internal rage is going to assist you in the deadlift more than any other lift. And so visualization. Anybody here ever do any visualization at all for anything? Yeah, good. Okay, so the whole purpose of visualization and strength training is we want to bridge the gap between absolute strength and limit strength. Does anybody know the differences? Okay, limit strength is just how much force you can exert in one all-out effort regardless of time. Basically like your max on a core lift. We just walked in there right now. Okay, what's absolute strength? You got shocked electrically, you're under hypnosis or something like that. Basically, there's some outside force that's going to help you, or like, your grandma's caught under a car and you're able to lift it off. So we've all heard those stories of people that are, shouldn't be able to lift certain things off, certain people do it. So we're trying to get as close to that level. Basically, ideally with visualization, we're getting to the point where if your grandma's under the car and it's more than you can deadlift, you can't pick it up. I mean, as cruel as that sounds, that's kind of the goal. But anyways, so some of the visualization strategies I've used here is basically you're gonna lay down for 15 to 20 minutes and just vividly imagine the experience. You wanna do it on a panoramic view, three-dimensional, bright colors, and try to see yourself as vividly as possible completing what you're gonna do. You wanna use all senses. You wanna like smell it, you wanna feel it, and that's gonna be your best chance of visualizing actually helping your lift. Okay, for training partners here, you want to surround yourself with good people. I know the self-help gurus always say you're a product of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So you want to have people with the right attitude. So ideally, you're going to train with people that are a little bit better than you. That's a perfect scenario, but that doesn't always exist. So I would personally rather work out with somebody that's weaker, that has a good attitude, than somebody that's stronger, that's kind of just magically gotten there. Okay, so you want people with similar goals. So if someone's goal is just to, maybe like look a little better and lose 5 pounds, and you're trying to set the world record, probably not, nothing wrong with either. It's just probably not a conducive training relationship. And ideally, you're going to be with people that are slightly better than you. But that's, you can play with that one a little bit. I've had people that I've trained with that were a lot weaker that were really good training partners. And finally, just basically, if you run with the lame, you're going to develop a limp eventually. And an old powerlifter once told me a good training partner is harder to find than a good woman. I think there's some truth to that, because I go to church and I'll see 500 women there. Most of them are good women, but I don't see a whole lot of people I'd want to work out with. Okay, so now some of the training variables. So basically the frequency of the deadlift, so it's going to be anything, with any lift, it's going to be the frequency is the biggest variable amongst individuals. So, with squatting, you're going to have a little more high frequency programs that people have been successful with, but you have some people, like that are top of the game right now are squatting heavy twice a month. Yeah, so I mean, it's all fine. If it's working for them, great. But it's going to be, the skill level required is going to determine the frequency. So the higher skill level involved, like Olympic lifting, is going to be more frequently than deadlift is by far the lowest skill of any mainstream, powerlifting or Olympic lift. So that's why it's not going to be as frequent. So generally, I'm going to say deadlift, if someone just puts me on the spot and says for everybody, I'll say 4 times a month, 3 heavy. Okay, that's generally going to be where it's at, or be a starting point, and then if that wasn't working so well, we'd adjust off of that. Okay, and then the residual effects of the tapering. So who here competes in powerlifting meets? Okay, how far out do you generally do your last heavy deadlift workout?
3-4 weeks.
Yeah. What do you, week? See? Okay. I would generally say my advice would be on that is about 10 days to 2.5 to 3 weeks with, I think it was Matt Kroc that was talking about how every time he got injured before a meet, he'd have this like PR in the deadlift because he's forced not to deadlift for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden, wow, I hit a PR. So then it's like, you know, why not take a, instead of like a so-called preventative strategy, just do that from now on. So basically,
would that depend a little bit on the level of the lifter?
That's what I was gonna say next. Absolutely. Yeah, no, good question. So that's gonna depend, a lot of it besides individual differences, the level of lifter, because I don't care, you know, how accustomed you come to training, an 800-pound deadlift is always gonna be more taxing than a 300-pound deadlift, no matter what. I mean, unless the person's Benedict Magnuson and the other person's maxing 305, you know, it's gonna always be more taxing. So absolutely, it's gonna be on the, okay, so the deadlift, a lot of it is, meaning it's an equation of brute strength, so the recovery is super important. It's not super high skilled. So when you're looking at like Olympic lifts, you're looking at, okay, it's very much so, I mean, every lift's about neurological proficiency, but those are like complicated neurological proficiency. This is more or less an equation of brute strength. You gotta know how to do it, but you need to be recovered to perform your best. And how much we recover is technique dependent. Now this is back to the principle of individual differences. Anybody here ever seen Orlando Green deadlift? What do you call it, good technique? No, okay. Does it seem to work okay? Yeah, it works pretty good, yeah. But anyways, with him, if we try to actually deadlift heavy with him every single week, there's no way. I mean, it's like once a month. You know, then we do a lot of stuff to strengthen his posterior chain. And actually, as we get the right muscle strength, and it sort of has got his form a tad better, you know, so that, but like I'm saying, if somebody with that ballistic rounded back style, they're recovering so slow from that workout that if you try to do that heavy every single week, you might run into problems. Okay, so deloading. Anybody know what a deload is? Go ahead.
It's when you start tapering away and the weight percentage as you're preparing to peak for an event.
Yeah, even if not necessarily, we'll even take it a step further and say not even necessarily peak for an event, like a back off, yes. Okay, so what these do is they provide a good opportunity to develop your technique. It's not just like slack off and do nothing. It's actually like do something and get, you know, technically more proficient at what you're doing. So generally for the deloads, we'll say about 60 to 70% of the total volume you're gonna do, okay? So volume's your weights, your sets times your reps. And for deadlifting, generally I'll say every 3 to 4 weeks is a starting point of how often to deload. It may end up being a little bit more, it may end up being a little less, but that's a good starting point to try out. Okay, so techniques, pretty individualized here, but we're gonna talk a little about foot placement. So again, we talked about earlier the stumpy body types are generally sumo. Is there anybody here besides you, Tina, that's pulling sumo? No, if you guys can stick around for the practical after, let's look at some stuff then, because I got a couple things that might help you. For conventional deadlifting, where do you put your feet, anybody?
Vertical jump.
Vertical jump, that's a good one. Anybody else have any other way of determining it? Generally, that's what I'll...
Outside my belly.
You know, the principle of individual differences right now. There you go. Beautiful. Okay. But anyways, the way we're going to say, unless you're, you know, one of great girth that has some issues getting down, you know, you're going to generally start with your feet about where you'd vertical jump from. So just like actually get like you're ready to jump. So if I'm going to jump, my feet are right here about hip width. That's what it'd be. The other old school way they used to do is stand on something like a bench, jump off, and where they'd land, they would determine their deadlift stance that way. There was that way too. So a lot of people like that one. Pulling the slack out of the bar, what's that mean? Anybody?
You hope that you have a whippy bar and you can actually bend it without taking the weight off it.
Yeah.
Just get it tight before you pull.
Okay, so that's a good thing, obviously, but we don't want to do that at the expense of not being explosive. So obviously, you're going to create tension before you pull, and it's not going to be. You don't just like go up and like, if I'm going to grab this, you know, it's not going to be. It's not deadlift's not going to be like this where I just grab it. It's going to actually create tension first, and then you just got to think of it as a pull, not like an actual jerk. And that's how you can sort of get your explosive power without, you know, with still taking the slack out of the bar. And my main cue that I use on that is I just think of the deadlift as one giant hip extension movement. Like that's what I'm trying to do, is just extend my hips. That's all I think about, you know, because I've had some emails from people and they'll have issues with the deadlift. I say, well, what cues are you using? And they'll literally list out like 12. Like, no wonder nothing's getting done because you're confusing yourself.
Yeah.
You know, so I stick with 1 or 2 and just roll with that. You know, if you guys can stick around after we're practicing, you know, we can try to figure out a couple that might, you know, work for your style. So, okay, so dead stop or touch and go, that's a huge debate in powerlifting. What do you guys think? I'm a both. I don't think one's all good, I don't think one's all bad, because the advantage of touch and go is what?
You keep your tension.
Exactly. You do have that stretch shortening cycle. It's going to assist you and be more explosive on the way up.
You can also lift more weight than you can if you dead stop every rep.
That's another advantage. Okay, but let's look at dead stop. Okay, if your problem is every time you deadlift, so let's say your problem is, you know, you're pretty good. You're not good off the floor. Then you're going to want a dead stop because you want to work that point. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so basically what I'm talking about here is, have you guys seen a lot of deadlifters that are pretty successful, like a semi-rounded back technique? It doesn't look, you know, too healthy. Yeah, like, exactly. But like you've seen people be successful, like a lot of people. And, yeah, exactly. So there is, you know, if that's how you deadlift, I'd make sure you're a serious competitive powerlifter. I wouldn't do that if general fitness is your thing. That's fine. I wouldn't do that style. If you're a powerlifter, you know, just proceed with caution. You're not going to be able to pull as heavy as frequently. And you are sort of picking your poison with that. When you start with a semi-rounded back position, what I mean by that is you're going to be able to yank it off the floor pretty quick. But then when you get right here, you're kind of like out of position. So you're basically just trying to outrun your bad technique. And that's not saying that to be negative, because there's a lot of good people that do deadlift that way, but that's the reality. If you're in a flat back position, when I get right here, it's just a real easy hip extension. Okay, so no deadlift. If you people heard about these no deadlift training, like I'm gonna do my workout and I'm on this new program to increase my deadlift where you don't deadlift. I generally don't think that's a very good idea, you know. Anecdotal evidence, I mean, usually people that do that are like mediocre. They went from crappy to mediocre, and it's, you know, because they gave up drinking or something. It ain't to do with this. So anecdotally, that wouldn't make sense. It totally violates the principle of specificity. And usually the people that will say they do that are going to throw out like some science at you, but then it's like totally violating the principle of specificity. So it's definitely very skewed. And you know, you're obviously going to need some technical reinforcement. And next time somebody's talking to you about how good they've got the deadlift without deadlifting, I guarantee you they're walking the bar out their knees. So they can just walk in and smell a deadlift and increase it, you know? Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about speed. Okay, speed is king in the deadlift because you know, there's no stretch shortening cycle, so we want to pull that weight up as fast as possible. Even with crappy technique, you can still outrun potential bad sticking points if you pull the weight fast enough. Yeah, the National Strength and Conditioning, the National Association of Speed and Explosion, the NACE certification, they were talking about their standard for what athletes should be able to lift is 2.5 times their body weight. They're basically saying if you can deadlift 2.5 times your body weight, you're gonna get faster. Beyond that, you know, it's not gonna continue to carry over so much in your speed. So if you weigh 200, that means you got to be able to deadlift in about 500 to be as fast as you can, probably. Okay, very beneficial because all the posterior work to, you know, any kind of jumping. And look, here's a picture of Dr. Fred Hatfield. He was like 46 years old right there, pulling a 760. Look how high he's jumping.
Is that a real picture?
That's a real picture, and that's right up between smoking cigarettes between attempts. That's as real as it gets.
Did he get Russianed up before that, or?
Yeah, he's actually one of the innovators of that. Yep.
Yeah. If you look at him when he was, and look at him now, you know.
Okay, so cluster sets. Like, I didn't know that there was so much research till I heard Jonathan Oliver over at TCU talking about the cluster sets. And basically that's the way I've been doing it forever is just, you know, the whole thing of more sets, less reps. So what the cluster sets have basically done is, you know, we already talked about it with the cat training earlier. It's basically, you're going to be able to produce greater force, greater velocity, greater power, excuse me. And the deadlift, you know, we want to keep in mind, especially with speed training, the deadlift is a deadlift. So the 1 rep thing really holds true there because there is no stretch shortening cycle on it.
That's something in Olympic lifting that this is kind of transitioned over from there, because in Olympic lifting, because of the technique required, you essentially have to set up after every rep. So what they've come up with is about 20-second setup between each rep, because form is so important. So that's transitioned over now to powerlifting.
You don't ever see anybody doing like sets of just 8 straight or something. I mean, not very often. No, so, I mean, yeah, I mean, you do see it, but generally not people in the know, right? So some of the research that he pointed out to me, I've talked to him by email a little bit since then, was basically when they were doing cluster training, they're at a, you know, about 85% max. This was in the bench press, so they were producing 21 to 25% more power. The peak velocity was much greater, weights moving faster, and, you know, just greater force, greater velocity, and greater power, even in the power clean at 80% training this way. So, I mean, there's actually research to back it. So, I mean, logically, like we talked about, if you just walked out of a cave, it's a 1 rep sport, more first reps.
You
Makes
know, I
sense.
haven't thought about it in terms of energy systems, but from an ATP standpoint, I guess there's some energy system recovery in that set. In
Have
that
to be.
time. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, big time after even like 10 seconds. That's why the rest pause training works so well.
Yeah.
Because after like 20, you know, you're starting to replenish. Absolutely.